Well, good evening, everybody. We're here, Scott Lake Baptist Church. We've got a small group in the house and several online. Rosemary, Glenn and Gary are all here. Hello. Let me know, please, in the chat if you have a hard time hearing or seeing me. I'll just leave that right there. If you have any comments or prayer requests, you're welcome to chat them right into the chat.
Hey, Pastor, could we, that first song you had, could we sing that on Saturday? That's really pretty.
Well, yeah, we could. It's not exactly patriotic, but
yeah.
I think we might try that because it is a very good song.
I got a lady that's coming for sure.
Awesome.
She works at the flea market. I talked to her again, and I think she was, what's that? You know, the people up north that they have buggies and horses.
Oh, the Amish?
Amish. I think she's part of that faith, and she's so sweet and kind. And I've been asking. I asked her last week, and I said, "Don't forget, Esther." And I said 11 o'clock, and then I said, "No, it's 4 o'clock Saturday."
Good.
And she's going to bring a soup.
Awesome. Well,
she said, "Can I bring something?" I said, "Sure." But I said, "Esther, bring a big one if you bring it." And she said, "I will."
Awesome.
And she bakes. She's like Stacy. She bakes cookies. She sells all that stuff.
At the flea market. Excellent. Yeah. Well, we'll be sure and love on her when she's here. That would be wonderful. And anybody out there that cares to invite people to our Saturday event, please do it. And we want it to be a wonderful time. Our church spreading the love, especially to the veterans, but anybody else who's there as well. We got some great music planned. It's going to be a wonderful time. All right, well, this morning I talked to you about it's complicated. And that, of course, is referring to why do people get divorced and how does God, who hates divorce, also allow divorce and care about people, and how should we behave towards people who are divorced? We should be kind like Jesus was. It is complicated. Relationships are complicated. It's hard work. Now, Paul, in 1 Corinthians chapter 7, wrote to the church about things that they had asked, and a lot of this chapter is about the complications, about marriage, about making things less complicated for them. So tonight's sermon is making things less complicated, and our text is almost the entire chapter of 1 Corinthians 7. So, let's move on. Now concerning the matters about which you wrote. So, think of the New Testament letters as actually being letters that were written at a specific time, in a specific culture, to a specific audience about a specific problem. And so Paul wrote first 6 chapters about things that he noticed that he wanted to correct in the community there in Corinth. They also had written him some questions and sent them him a letter asking for explanation about things. And that's what he talks about starting in chapter 7. Concerning the matters about which you wrote, it is good for a man not to have sexual relations with a woman. The abstinent lifestyle is good. Why is it good? Well, it's good because there's no concerns about passing along diseases. There's no concerns about getting embroiled into a relationship that goes bad and you heartbreak. But, of course, that's not how the world is. God created us with a drive. But because of the temptation to sexual immorality, each man should have his own wife and each woman her own husband. Paul is very careful here to provide an even playing field, so to speak, for husband and wife. And they are to have a healthy relationship and take care of each other's conjugal rights, you might say. The husband should give to his wife her conjugal rights, and likewise the wife to her husband. For the wife does not have authority over her own body, but the husband does. Likewise, the husband does not have authority over his own body, but the wife does. Do not deprive one another, except perhaps by agreement for a limited time, that you may devote yourselves to prayer. Yes, Lula.
Well, what if you have a problem in your marriage, though? I mean, sometimes people can't always have the sex they want to have because men have erectile dysfunction. So
Sure.
Well,
what you do is the best you can, given, sometimes we get sick. Sometimes, things happen. It's just, Paul is saying marriage is important. He said it's good. If you can live an abstinent lifestyle, go for it. It's great. However, if you can't, be married and take care of each other the best you can. And rather than deprive one another, it would be better if you have agreement. Let's abstain for a certain amount of time. We're going to be fasting and praying or something like that. But you should never just leave the person hanging, with all the urges that come along with life, right? Marriage is created to be an outlet, and the enjoyment of the bedroom relationship is to help the relationship bond and grow. But then come together again, so Satan may not tempt you because of your lack of self-control. God created a drive inside of people, and it's a very good thing. A lot of times I think because of the problems of immorality, I think a lot of times people think of sex as a bad thing. It's actually a very good thing. It's a necessary thing. And God created human women different than female animals, right? Mammals go on a estrous cycle and they go into heat every so often. It's kind of mechanical and instinctual. But the menstrual cycle of a woman is different because God wants that relationship to be different and better. It's not just about the drive to procreate. There's also intimacy and bonding that needs to take place. And God made this drive, and it's a good thing. And it's good when you're in a marriage and take care of each other that way so that you don't have an excessive passion. Now, as a concession, not a command, I say this. When Paul says now as a concession, not a command, he's giving you advice. He's saying this is not something from God, but I'm giving you some advice.
King James says, but I speak this by permission.
Okay. A lot of times the translations will phrase things differently. What he's saying is, I'm giving you some good advice here, but this is not a command. Don't think of it as God's command. It's my advice. Now, as a concession, not a command, I say this. I wish that all were as I myself am. Paul was a single man. Paul had a gift to be single, and he devoted his time and his life to serving Jesus. He didn't have a wife that would also require a lot of his time. He was able to put his whole self. He abstained because he was not married. Paul was single. Yep. I wish that all were as I myself am, but each has his own gift from God, one of one kind and one of another. Some people, and we've got a couple in our church that had never married, and they are just devoted to serving, and that's great. Most people have that drive, and they would be excessively lonely if they didn't have that companionship. Marriage is a good thing. It's meant to be. God created it that way. And as we talked about this morning, God hates divorce, but he also realizes in a sinful, broken world, sometimes it's necessary. And he much more is concerned about people having a good life than he is about upholding that holy standard from the beginning. He referred to the standard of one man, one woman for life as marriage, but when people deviate from that standard, it's complicated. And we went into all that this in the morning, so you can look at the morning sermon if you're curious about that. Here, he's offering some advice to make things a little less complicated, like take care of each other. And here he says he wishes that all people were single and were happy to be single. But God doesn't give that gift to everybody. Some people need to be married. To the unmarried and the widows, I say that it is good for them to remain single, as I am. But if they cannot exercise self-control, they should marry. For it is better to marry than to burn with passion. So the outlet for the sexual desire that God created is marriage. And it's better to be married than to be lonely and have all that urge and passion that just frustrates people. To the married, I give this charge, not I, but the Lord. Okay, so now he's saying it the other way. If you're married, what I'm about to say is a command from God. Paul is very careful when he tells us his own ideas, his own opinions, or his own advice, and when he says, now this is from God. So we understand Paul is a godly Christian, perhaps the best Christian that ever lived, and he gives good advice and he's well-meaning, but still it's human advice. To the married I give this charge, not I, but the Lord. The wife should not separate from her husband, but if she does, she should remain unmarried or else be reconciled to her husband, and the husband should not divorce his wife. Basically the same thing God said in Malachi. This morning we looked at the verse, God hates divorce. And he doesn't want people, he wants marriage to be a stable institution for the good of society. But it's a broken world. Hearts are hard. Relationships fall apart. People are left lonely. It is something that really does concern Jesus, and he cares about people in that situation. And the husband should not divorce his wife. So they both have a responsibility to step up to their vows. To the rest, I say, I, not the Lord, so now he's back to giving advice, that if any brother has a wife who is an unbeliever and she consents to live with him, he should not divorce her. So normally we teach that a Christian should marry a Christian. There's compatibility in the home. It's not good to have one of the spouses undermine the faith of the other. But not everybody that's Christian that's married is married to a Christian. There are times when people are married to unbelievers. In the case of an unbelieving wife, the man should not, if she consents to live with him in his faith, they shouldn't divorce. If any woman has a husband who is an unbeliever, and he consents to live with her, she should not divorce him. What if they're not consenting to live with the believer? What if a couple gets married and then one of them later becomes a Christian, and now the person that's not the Christian can't stand the fact that the other party is now worshiping God and taking up time going to church or whatever it is Christians do, that spouse isn't okay with it and they want to leave. What do you do then? Well, the Bible says if they want to go, let them go. Yeah, you had a question.
Yeah, what about somebody that marries somebody of a different faith?
Well, that's the same thing. Right. Yeah, if you're a Christian it's always wisest and best to marry a Christian. You go to church together, you pray together, you grow in that part of your relationship together, rather than let God come between the husband and wife, because one believes this way, one believes that way. Now, it's true among all Christians, we might have slightly different opinions about certain things.
Well, what if a Christian married a Jewish person?
Same thing.
They believe in God.
No, they're not believers. Unless they're a believer in Jesus, they're not a Christian.
Well, no, but I mean, they still believe in God.
Yeah, a lot of people believe in God that aren't Christian, right? They believe in a version of God that's not really the God of the Bible. Yeah. And so when you're talking about marriage being compatible spiritually, it's best if you line up spiritually, right? So one doesn't get offended by a person's faith. And if it so happens that one is a believer and one is not a believer, the believer might win over the non-believer by being a good wife or a good husband. And that happens over time. But sometimes it might not. What he goes on to say, for the unbelieving husband is made holy because of his wife, and the unbelieving wife is made holy because of her husband. What does that mean? Well, that's a little strange, but basically what God is doing there is he's acknowledging there are Christian households that have an advantage of having God in the home, and it protects them from spiritual oppression and such like that. Well, it applies even if only one of the spouses is a Christian. That's considered a Christian home. Otherwise, your children would be unclean. But as it is, they are holy. Again, that seems very strange. I think all that it really means is the household is considered by God deserving of a protection of a Christian household with one believing parent. And that's good for the kids, it's good for the spouse, and so forth. Yeah.
My grandson, I think his wife, she wasn't so close to God, but now through Jared, she's getting closer.
Yeah, and I think husbands and wives have a positive effect on each other if they're respecting each other and listening and so forth. Good. Yeah. And we should all realize that our relationships with other Christians, there might be differences on some matters. Lots of issues come up, and good Christians will take one view and other good Christians will take another view. That can happen in a marriage too. But the bottom line for Christians to be in league with each other is, what do you believe about Jesus? What do you believe about salvation and the Word of God? Right? So Jesus is God. He was born of a virgin. He rose from the dead. These are our core beliefs to be a Christian, for Christians. And if someone doesn't believe those core beliefs, and they're in a marriage partnership with someone who does, it says here in verse 15, but if the unbelieving partner separates, let it be so. If they don't want to live with the Christian spouse anymore, and they leave, let them go. That's an abandonment, and that's one of the grounds for divorce that God gives. In such cases, the brother or the sister is not enslaved, right? We're never slaves of our spouse, and we don't have to do anything to please them if it contradicts how to please God. So I've always told this, and some people may disagree. I don't care, it's true. Let's say there's a believing spouse. She's a wife, and she loves her husband, and she's trying to be a good spouse to her husband. The husband is a jerk. He doesn't believe in God. He doesn't want her going to church. And he puts his foot down. Woman, you're not going to church on Sunday. I need my breakfast, or whatever. What should she do?
Go to church.
Absolutely right. She should go to church. Right? She's not a slave of her husband. She's an equal partner of her husband. And that's the way it should be. Right? in such cases, the brother or the sister is not enslaved. God has called you to peace. For how do you know, wife, whether you will save your husband? Or how do you know, husband, whether you will save your wife? If the unbeliever wants to leave, that does not put any kind of negative stigma on the believer. The believer is not bound to that situation. Let them go. It's the other person's choice, and it's on them. But if you happen to be married to an unbeliever who wants to live with you, the right thing to do is to be a good spouse to that person and try to win them over. But you don't know if you're going to be successful at winning them over. You might not. And God has called us to peace. He wants peaceful homes. He wants people to get along. All right, jumping down to verse 25. Now concerning the betrothed, that's a fancy word to say those who are engaged. Now a betrothal is a little more binding than an engagement, right? Today, usually the guy pops down on a knee, opens up the ring box and says, "Will you marry me?" And she blushes and says yes, hopefully, or maybe she says, "Heck no, where'd you get that idea that I wanted to marry you?" But when they come to that agreement, there's a bond, an agreement that they're going to go through with marrying each other. It might be a year down the line, going to plan the wedding and all that. But if somebody breaks the engagement, they're perfectly within their rights to do so. You might have said yes hastily, or you might have bought that ring hastily. A lot of times younger people are kind of foolish, and you wonder if what are they thinking when they attach to somebody that's going to be a life partner. You wonder, did they jump in too quick? And if an engagement gets broken, it's sad. It hurts the other person, but it's probably better than actually going through with the marriage, if that's not the right arrangement, the right match. But a betrothal is a little different. There's other people involved in the ancient world. Sometimes there's arrangements made between families. There's more of a binding feeling to a betrothal. Breaking a betrothal brings disgrace. It might be legal, but it's disgraceful. It's not quite. It's more serious to break a betrothal than an engagement, given their customs. So now he's turning his attention to those people who are betrothed to marry. I have no command from the Lord. Again, it's his advice. But I give my judgment as one who, by the Lord's mercy, is trustworthy. So what he's saying here is, I don't have a commandment to tell you from God, but if you want to know what I think, and I happen to be pretty wise, then he's going to tell you.
Mr. Knapp,
Oh, yeah.
the King James says, he said to be faithful. It says, I give my judgment as one that hath obtained mercy of the Lord, to be faithful.
Yeah, trustworthy is what he said there. So it's the same kind of thing. So as Paul gives good advice, and he's giving advice now to people who are betrothed, I think that in view of the present distress, it is good for a person to remain as he is. Are you bound to a wife? Do not seek to be free. So have you betrothed yourself? Have you bound yourself to a future marriage? Well, don't break that. That's a pretty serious offense if you break it. Are you free from a wife? Have you not entered a betrothal? Well, do not seek a wife. If Paul's advice, not from God, but Paul says it's better not to marry. We're going to get into why in a minute. But he's saying if you're betrothed, it's better to stay betrothed than to actually go through with the marriage, but don't give up on the relationship. Someday maybe you will get married. But if you're not betrothed, you may not even want to go down that road. Just stay single. Are you free from a wife? Do not seek a wife. But if you do marry, you have not sinned. This is only my advice. It's better not to marry. But if you do marry, that's fine. That's what he's saying. And if a betrothed woman marries, she has not sinned. So the woman or the man, it's better for both to stay unmarried if they can handle it. Yet those who marry will have worldly troubles, and I would spare you that. So, given the time period that Paul was in, and things that were happening, perhaps he's referring to fiery persecution of churches, and entering a marriage and having children might leave those children as orphans because you're killed for your faith. Whatever Paul's thinking, there was a time when marriage was not the most expedient thing. I want you to be free from anxieties. The unmarried man is anxious about the things of the Lord. This is verse 32. How to please the Lord. But the married man is anxious about worldly things. How to please his wife. And his interest is divided. It's better to stay unmarried, according to Paul, so that you can be more focused on serving the Lord, if you can handle it. And the unmarried or betrothed woman is anxious about the things of the Lord, how to be holy in body and spirit, but the married woman is anxious about worldly things, how to please her husband. I say this for your own benefit. So if you're thinking about entering a marriage, if you're betrothed, and you can hold off, once you tie the knot, life changes. Difficulties will come from the world that persecutes the Christians, and it'll come from the fact that you are now completely changed. When you enter that marriage, your focus needs to be building that home as well as serving in the church. And for some people, it's best to not marry and just stay fruitful serving in the church. Not to lay any restraint upon you, but to promote good order and to secure your undivided devotion to the Lord. If anyone thinks that he is not behaving properly toward his betrothed, if his passions are strong, and it has to be, let him do as he wishes, let them marry. It is not a sin. Well, of course it's not. But Paul is giving his advice that it's better not to marry at this point. But whoever is firmly established in his heart, being under no necessity, but having his desire under control, and has determined this in his heart to keep her as his betrothed, he will do well. So you are betrothed, and you can handle living celibate. You can stay betrothed. It won't break the betrothal, but you won't tie the knot yet, because that'll bring on other troubles. So then he who marries his betrothed does well, and he who refrains from marrying will do even better. So it's a good thing to marry, but if you can handle not being married, it's even better, Paul says. A wife is bound to her husband as long as he lives, but if her husband dies, she is free to be married to whom she wishes, only in the Lord. So until death us do part is the phrase we use in a wedding ceremony, and it's basically promising a lifelong commitment. But when one of them dies, the other one's free to marry again. Yet in my judgment, she is happier if she remains as she is. And I think that I too have the Spirit of God. Does that make things less complicated for you? It's complicated, all right.
Well, in a way, what is it saying? If a person is betrothed, if they're not going to marry, they can be together as long as they don't have. If they're, what are they meaning? If they're living together, not to have sex, but they.
Yeah, you're not married yet. Right, you're not married yet. So this is kind of the progression, right? you get out of your puberty years and you start getting interested in the opposite sex, right? You notice somebody. You start to wonder, will they date me? You flirt a little bit. You ask them out on a date. That's just a dating relationship. It's just friends doing things together. Then you decide, I like her. I want to go steady, which means you can't date other people. You're going steady, right? But that doesn't mean you're engaged, right? When you promise yourself to the other person, if they will have you, and you go through the engagement process or whatever, you pop the question and then she says yes or whatever, then you're in a thing called engagement, right? That's another step towards marriage. But in that society, there is another step closer to marriage. It's a legal bond that you're going to be married someday. It just hasn't happened yet.
What about people now that they're living together and maybe they're not having sex? Is that all right with God? I mean, some people I think are together.
Roommates.
Hopefully they're not having sex. They're living together.
Yeah. Well, let me just say that what goes on behind closed doors between consenting adults, if it doesn't hurt anybody, it's nobody's business.
But it's still a sin if they're not married.
It's between them and God, and you don't necessarily pry your eyeballs into their keyhole and see what's going on in there, right? Right? So Jesus pointed back to the standard of marriage at the creation. One man united with one woman for life. That was God's plan and pattern and purpose for marriage. So Jesus points back to that. And then along comes the question about divorce. And he says, well, the law says, because of your hard hearts, husbands, if you're not going to be faithful to your wife, if you're going to send her away and divorce her, you need to supply her with a certificate that exonerates her in the breakup of the marriage. And it frees her to attach to somebody else. Right? You need to do that for her. So God hates divorce and God allows divorce because it's a broken world. So it's one of those things. And I think Jesus is saying something less than the ideal may have to be the thing that happens. Because the world Jesus isn't, but the rest of us are all sinners. And some different accommodation needs to be made if you're not going to be lonely forever, right? So Jesus is saying divorce and remarriage is not the ideal. It's not the plan from the beginning. But if it has to happen.
My grandma and my mother were real good Christians. And my grandma, both her husbands died. So she was free to marry again. But she believed when you took the man's hand in marriage, you stayed with him till he died or you died.
Yeah, no matter how much he beat her? No matter how much he beat her?
That's the way she believed.
Yeah, but
because
do you think God wants an abused woman to stay in that?
No, my mom, when she divorced my dad, she felt really bad about it because she was a Christian. And she kept saying, I'm the black sheep of the family. And I said, Mom, he was abusive to you.
I understand.
You had to leave him.
I understand the stigma, right? Actually, the stigma, I think, is more against the woman than the man in the culture. And maybe talking 50 years ago or whatever, okay? The stigma of being divorced stained the woman more than the man. So God said, you got to protect them with that certificate. Now, I understand the stigma, but I also understand God's mercy. I think the reason Jesus didn't shame the woman at the well or for her 5 husbands or shame the woman caught in adultery was because he empathized with their situation. It was very difficult for them. They fell into a sin out of loneliness or whatever it was, and he said, where is everybody? Do they condemn you? No, neither do I condemn you. Go and sin no more. So But let me make this point because it's very important for Christians to have the attitude of forgiveness and mercy. Okay, So the person that was under society's stigma feels horrible. I'm a failure. I'm the black sheep of the family, like your mom or grandma said. Okay. So we as Christians in the new age, that after Jesus died on the cross and paid for our sins, the law is no longer over us like a taskmaster. The Jews had a strict law, and Jesus fulfilled it. Now we have the Holy Spirit guiding us in life. So we're not under a law. And I think when mistakes have been made, marriages have fallen apart because of hard hearts and because of sin and difficulties. When that happens, honestly, I don't think the world should be applying a stigma to those people. Who knows what they went through? Do we know? Maybe there was abuse. Maybe there was abandonment. Maybe there was whatever. And I don't think we can get inside the mind of anybody that may be in that lifestyle.
I tried to explain to my mom, I believe with all my heart that Jesus forgave my mom.
Sure.
She remarried, but she felt bad, She said, I said, no, you're not, Mom.
Well,
I said, my dad was abusive to you. He broke a rocking chair over her back.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. She did the right thing. Oh.
When he came home, he would want to beat her, and she'd have to hide the children. I had a sister and 2 brothers.
Wow.
And
no, God does not want women to put up with that. He does not. Yeah.
I'm going to beat by my dad too.
That's not good. We don't like that. So, okay, so when I can't change the fact that God created the world the way He did, where marriage is supposed to be one man, one woman for life. He made them male and female, Genesis 1, and He said the two should become one flesh, Genesis 2. That is the pattern God made, and that He made it for the best. He made it to be a huge blessing to the couple, to the children, to the whole society. Yeah, married people generally have children. So
that's because we're older.
well, the point I'm getting at is God made the standard because that is the best way society could function. However, brokenness, sin, hard hearts, interrelationship abuses happen, and a necessity comes of people to separate from a marriage. Right? Jesus talks about the necessities of doing that, and it's complicated, right? So Jesus referred to the standard as an ideal of perfection, and He allowed people to make an arrangement other than the ideal when they had to. So an abused woman leaves the marriage and attaches to another husband. Well, would it be better for her to just stay celibate the whole time? Maybe, but she might be so lonely, or she might be starving and needs a breadwinner. It's not our business to get inside of her head and see what her reasons are. It's an area where Jesus has offered grace for people who have had messed up lives.
He does that for all of our lives.
Yeah, and He does it in this aspect of life too. Huh? Well, you can be a good husband because you know Jesus, and you can be a kind servant to your wife. That's how God wants it to be.
I know, but if somebody's abused life,
if someone is abused, God, I don't think, is forcing them to put up with that. Abuse is a very bad thing.
Yeah, but it wasn't my fault.
No, if you're abused, it's not your fault. But if you do the abusing, it is your fault. You're talking about being abused?
Yeah, I've been abused.
Yep. So that is wrong. They shouldn't have done that to you. That's bad, right? And you shouldn't have to feel like it's your fault. No. No. Now,
It doesn't make it easier for us.
no, I think we're damaged.
We're damaged.
We are damaged people because of the traumas we've had in the past, and we carry that with us. And it sometimes causes us to be mistrustful, or it causes us to be quick to anger, or whatever. These are flaws that come into the human character because of troubles that they've experienced, right?
And now it seems like the devil is just trying to destroy marriage, and with the transgenderism and children's identity.
Well,
I mean, he's just getting into everything.
yeah, and you must expect that, right? The devil opposes God, and God made marriage, so the devil attacks marriage. That is, I mean, no matter what God, whatever God does, Satan will try to ruin it or counterfeit it or deceive people with it or whatever.
People are being deceived.
Yeah, we are.
A young guy where he gets his cigarettes at Wild Bill's. He's got a goatee and he wears eye makeup and it bothers me. I mean, I'm sorry, it bothers me.
Why? It's not your choice.
I don't like to see a guy wearing makeup. He's wearing eyeshadow and
I know, but
he's wanting to be. I want to say, do you want to be a girl or do you want to be a boy?
Why? What does it matter? I mean,
because God made man and God made woman.
Yeah, and
that'd be like
some men grow up playing with dolls and some women grow up playing with trucks, right? What does it matter?
But you don't want to be.
Does the Bible say that men have to be macho? Remember Jacob and Esau? Esau was daddy's favorite because he was a hunter and he was out there in the wild and doing manly things. Jacob was soft and he stayed in with his mom and cooked and whatever, right? So they were twins and they had a different personality, right? So it should be okay if a male leans feminine or a female leans masculine. But the problem is we make them follow their stereotype, and if they don't, we shame them. And so what happens is, here comes along someone says, oh, well, you can change. If you want to be a girl, I'll give you a surgery and whatever. No, just let people be who they are, who they're made to be. Men can be more feminine or masculine. There's a range. There's some macho men, and a lot of them end up in prison because they're just so aggressive and mean. And some men are much more artistic and sensitive, and that's okay too. Some women are tough. Man, you can't take them on because they'll nail you. They're tough, right? And some women are very feminine and sensitive. Let people be where they feel they are. But if you're a man, you're a man. And if you're a woman, you're a woman. Don't try and change it because you feel something.
But I think teenagers, I remember being 15 or 16, and I was laying on my bed in my bedroom, and I thought, what would it be like to be a guy? I just was,
Sure.
And then I thought, I don't want to be a guy. I want to go into the military. But a lot of women now, you do anyway.
Yeah.
I had thought about it during the Vietnam War.
Mm-hmm.
I went down to apply, but they told me, they said, well, if you get down to 100, I was 130, and they wanted me to be thinner.
Oh, brother.
But at the time, I thought, I'm glad God made me a woman. I don't want to be a man.
Good, right.
But when young people, that's why we need to talk to them more, because
I think to help the children that are confused, right? What we need to do is make sure they understand they are what they are and don't expect the world to change to make you feel.
I think it's best if children grow up in the church. I mean, that helped me a lot being in my church when I was growing up.
Sure.
and then I got saved when I was 12.
I'm a big advocate for growing up in church.
I mean, there was times in my life I did wrong, but I came back to God because I witnessed to a friend of my daughter's, and she said, I remember when you didn't go to church, but I saw what Bonnie put on Facebook, and she said something about God does not hold it against me, my past,
Right. That's why Jesus died on the cross.
Real good. He's, I forget how she said it, but like you said, he's nailed all that to the cross, and we're not under those. That's what she said. Well, I'm not under those charges anymore. And when I read that, I thought, boy.
Yeah. Yeah, that's excellent.
We were both abusive.
Yeah, it's not good to be abusive, though.
Yeah. She's abusive. I'm abusive.
So you guys should just stop it.
And if I've been abusive all my life, and she's not, how's that going to work around with me?
Well, because you were abused in the past does not give you the right to turn around and be an abuser in the present. Right? Right? What I'm saying is when it happens that a kid gets abused and he grows up injured from all that abuse, right? That doesn't mean he should turn around and be abusive to other people.
Ask God to forgive you if you feel abusive.
Right.
Like if
I mean, it's not the kid's fault that he was abused, but when he becomes an adult and he starts to abuse someone else, it is his fault. Right? Abuse is.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is your past history.
Yeah, way back in the past, people are injured and abused. That's true.
Yeah, oh yeah.
It's sad. The world is so broken, and I want to encourage everybody.
My dad used to call me, here comes that dog.
No, that's not good. But I want to encourage everybody that the Lord knows the misery, the sadness, the loneliness that we go through for various reasons. Pretty much all of our sadness and loneliness comes from relationships. Bad relationships that wounded us, or good relationships that ended, we miss. And God is not interested in shaming and holding you up to a standard that's pretty much impossible in a broken world. God wants you to have peace and joy in Him. Now, Paul's advice here is sometimes it gets so distressing in the world, it's better not to get married. That he's saying that as advice, not a command from God. He says,
you're going to have problems even if you're single.
I don't think marriage is a difficult thing. It takes a lot of work, a lot of patience. It takes two to try and heal things. And you don't always have two on board, and sometimes people leave and it's...
But like I said, you're still going to have problems even if you're single. Because I know I was...
Well, but one problem you won't have if you don't have children is leaving your children orphans, right? Now, if you do have children, and when Paul's talking about it, pretty much the people that were having children were married. Today, lots of people have children, right? And they're not necessarily married. But Paul's talking about that. Now, he's saying, if you marry, you're likely to bring children into the world, and the times are so tough, you might want to think twice. Should you bring children into the world? Well, if you're betrothed, don't break your betrothal, but don't tie the knot until things cool down and you can have a better life and raise your children. Yeah.
But I hate to bring this up because when I had Karen and I wasn't married, but in the Old Testament, it says if you have a child and you're not married, they are a bastard.
Well, that's the word. That's what the word means, right?
And
we don't use that word very much.
I hated,
Yeah, it's become a swear word.
Yeah.
But
now, like my daughter had Jared, but then they got married. I helped them. After he was only 2 months old and they got married, but Jared always knows that they weren't married when they had him. But
and
she was married.
Okay, so there is that problem in the world, right? People having children out of wedlock. Okay. How does God deal with that?
Well, he said in the Old Testament, they're a bastard.
No, how does God deal with the parents?
Well, he always
No,
has
God,
grace.
the King James word that you're using doesn't make the kid less human.
No.
It's not the kid's fault, right? What it means is he doesn't have both mom and dad, right? He was born out of wedlock. So now I've got grandkids that were born out of wedlock, right? Right?
But now they're married.
Right, and your daughter was born out of wedlock. So I'm asking, how do you think God treats and deals with the people that had that kind of relationship, that got them a child, got them pregnant out of wedlock, or
Well, I think he hopes they eventually will get married.
where would you go in the Bible for that?
In this part here too.
Okay, okay. What I would say is Jesus pointed to the standard that was best. And that means everything other than that standard is not as good. But he doesn't shame the people, right? He didn't shame the woman that had 5 husbands. He didn't shame the woman that was caught in adultery, right? He had a very kind, loving approach to people. He wasn't mad at them trying to exact some kind of justice out of the sin. What he was doing was trying to make life better for them.
So they wouldn't sin.
No, he was trying to make life better for them because their sin got them into a situation. He would like them to have a...
That's what I mean, so they wouldn't sin.
But you're wrong.
Well, he doesn't want them to sin.
Well, no, he doesn't want anybody to sin. But you're taking it like he's holding it against them. I'm taking it like these people have a harsh situation that Jesus understands how difficult it is for them, and he allowed them to divorce and remarry.
But he also said to the woman, go and sin no more.
But why did he say sin no more?
Because he didn't want her to stay in that lifestyle.
Do you think he tossed... So whatever was going on in her life that made her commit adultery, do you think Jesus said, that's your problem, don't ever do it again? Or was he saying, I understand how lonely you are, and the way you're trying to satisfy yourself is not good for you. I'm going to give you the power to get out of that lifestyle
And
by...
not to sin anymore.
Listen. I'm going to give you the power to get out of that lifestyle by telling you you can avoid sin in the future. I'm giving you power to get out of that lifestyle and never fall into it again. That's what he meant by go and sin no more. You're legalistic in your way of thinking.
Sometimes.
Right. But the idea is this is the pattern, this you must do, God says this, and this comes if you don't. It's true, sin is a rejection of God, that if we die in our sins, we get punished in the afterlife for our sins, okay? But God is not this. God gives laws because they're best for us, not to make us miserable or limit us from fun. God told us this is the pattern for marriage because that's what would make life the best. When people fall out of that, they're miserable. And God cares about people who are miserable. This woman was miserable. She thought somehow if she committed adultery with this guy, then she would be happy. It didn't work. They grabbed her, they brought her in to stone her to death, and Jesus says, let him who is without sin cast the first stone. And then he said to her, they all left. He said to her, where'd they go? Who's left to condemn you? No one. Well, I don't condemn you either. I want to give you encouragement to get out of this lifestyle and go have a wonderful life. Sin no more. That command, sin no more, was the same thing as when Peter said, command me to walk to you on the water. Because when Jesus said, you come to me on the water, Peter was able to walk on the water. Jesus' commands give us power to obey. She was lost. She was miserable. She was looking in wrong places for her happiness. Jesus saw that. He saw them taking advantage of her, wanting to stone her to death. And he said, I don't condemn you. Go and sin no more. Which gives her the power to go and have a better lifestyle. And not grab men as put her hopes in for happiness in men, even if the men don't belong to her. So I don't think we should look at this as a legalistic issue, right? I think we should, building always makes noises. I think we should look at it more as God trying to help people have a better life, right? Pointing back to the standard wasn't a way of shaming the divorced people. It was a way of saying, God did this from the beginning because that was the best situation. Now we're in this situation, and it's not the best. He called it adultery, to be married again to someone else while your first spouse is alive. He called that adultery.
If you didn't have a good reason.
Nope. Under any reason whatsoever.
But you said abuse or abandonment.
Yeah, those are grounds for divorce, not for remarriage. Sometimes you have to get out of a marriage because it's deadly, dangerous, it's hurtful.
But you said if they, like my mother remarried, I don't.
Yep, that was adultery. But you got to understand the word adultery the way Jesus uses it. It means this is the standard, everything else is adultery. Everything else is adultery. Lust is adultery, right? Divorcing is adultery. Marrying again is adultery because it's not one man, one woman united for life. Now, people that are legalistic think, oh, God's being harsh. No, God set that up because that's what would have led to a beautiful world of people caring about each other and taking care of each other and being wonderful to each other. But because of sin, now there's anger and rivalry in the home. There's divorce, kids growing up without parents and orphans. You know, if the pattern was held up the whole time, the world would be great.
But you said God had to keep it like that because
For Israel.
Israel had to survive to have Jesus.
1,500 years. And so that's, I think, it says that the law that Moses gave, or the law God gave them, was a schoolmaster, a strict disciplinarian to keep them in line so that they wouldn't fall apart as a nation. Look at our nation now. Our nation's less than 300 years old, and it's about on the verge of collapse because of the divisions of our nation over things like gay marriage, straight marriage, abortion, all this marching and anger about Israel. America's about to fall apart. And America's got freedom. And freedom allows people to do what they want, which is not always the best thing to do, and it leads to trouble. Israel was given a very narrow path. Don't do this or we'll stone you to death. Don't do that or we'll stone you to death. So that the people in the middle could have a life that would last, in their nation, would last 1,500 years to produce the Messiah. Jesus satisfied the law, and he removed it from us. We're not under a law anymore. Our rule is love God, love man, love one another. Love your enemy. Love. Right? That's our rule. And so when you do things like you rob a bank in love, you can't really rob a bank in love, can you? That's not a loving thing. But what if you stole a loaf of bread because your daughter was starving?
Like miserable.
Yeah, right? So God sees the heart, and are you acting out of love or are you acting out of law? Right? We're free from the law so that now we can genuinely love God and be friends back to God. And when someone comes along, like the thing you read last week was wonderful. We made a video of you, by the way.
Yeah, I saw that.
Okay.
I told my family, I told him, and I said, watch me, I'm on YouTube. And Paul said, I'm on YouTube.
And a bunch of other formats. But you read that thing, and it said the gay boys come into the church, and they're holding hands, and someone says, oh, we got to do something about that. And the prostitute comes into church, and the smelly person comes into church, and everybody's like, we got to get rid of these people. And then the pastor says, well, I tell you what we should say. Welcome to church, where you get to feel the love and hear the gospel.
I noticed more people here today, and
that pleased me too. I thought that was great. Okay, we got to move on. We've gone too long. The idea that I want you to come away with is God's not out there shaming people for doing different than the standard of Genesis. Genesis standard was perfect and good, but chapter 4, Lamech took 2 wives, and that broke the pattern. That was adultery, right? Later on, you've got homosexual rape in Sodom, and that, of course, is horrible. And their city was destroyed. And later on, you got divorce and remarriage, but the women were left destitute. So you had to put a certificate in their hand and give them the freedom to go marry again. Jesus said, I point to the standard, but y'all are broken, and I'm not going to shame you for what you had to do to overcome the brokenness. If you've had to marry as a divorced person, I understand that was your attempt to survive, right? So sometimes women needed a breadwinner to survive. Whatever it was. So I don't think we should have a scowly look on our face about people that go against some standard. Now, there's nothing in the Bible that I know of that says men shouldn't wear makeup, like the one you're talking about. And that's not my thing.
It just makes me...
Yeah, because you have a certain way of thinking, but you know what? That person doesn't owe you to make you feel right by not wearing the makeup. If he wants to wear the makeup, I think it's silly too. But I'm not going to criticize him. People are free to do that.
But it's like he can't make up his mind. Do I want to be a guy?
But do you care? Between him and God, personally, if he's a man, he should just thank God for who he is and not worry about it. But
Not to judge other people.
Yeah.
Yeah, and she's trying to deal with it.
Yeah. So anyway, we gotta turn off the live stream and end our service here. So have a good week, everybody. Yeah, we have another song and a communion. Yep. Just a second. All right.